Yorgi Glushkov is not a joke. What I'm about to show you is pretty funny, and a lot of things about Yorgi Glushkov are funny, but I don't want to let a transient role in our story overshadow his story as a whole. Yorgi Glushkov grew up in Tryavna, Bulgaria. He was a tall, basketball-loving teenager, although evidently not tall enough to enter a contest or basketball-loving enough to enroll in a sports academy. Still, a coach in the city of Yambol saw Yorgi's promise and recruited the 15-year-old to leave home in 1975. Yorgi developed into a bruising forward who would star for Bulgarian clubs and the national team in his early 20s. That was before his season in the NBA. After the NBA, Glushkov played another decade in Europe, coached, then served briefly as Bulgaria's sports minister, and for a long time as president of its basketball federation. For Yorgi Glushkov, the NBA was a detour. For the NBA, Glushkov was a critical figure in the league's expanding universe of talent. Okay, I promised you something funny. The video you're about to see is one of the few things on YouTube from Yorgi Glushkov's NBA career. Someone ripped plays from a Suns-Sixers game in December of 1985, and then those clips got re-uploaded by the Bulgarian Basketball Federation, of which Glushkov has been president. And yet, this is not a Yorgi Glushkov highlight reel. Literally, the first play is Yorgi fumbling a rebound. He has his moments, like this is nice defensive work on the entry pass. The Gorilla's pleased. Gorilla knows ball. This is a beautiful tip dunk in transition. But then here's Yorgi breaking a mid-range jumper, and here he is mishandling a pass to give Charles Barkley a fast break dunk. This is a low-light reel, if anything. It's not a fair representation of Yorgi Glushkov's skill or his accomplishments, and yet it is something his own federation chose to publish. This is also a snapshot of what Yorgi Glushkov represented to NBA fans for a moment in time. How his name loomed over one of the most important projects in the history of American sports. Hey, real quick, I want to let you know that this video is part of our new miniseries called The Donnie Expedition. It's all about the history of international players in the NBA draft, and we are only able to do it because of all of our patrons. If you want to see more special stuff like this and see it exclusively or sooner than everyone else, please come check out Secret Base on Patreon. Okay, back to me. It takes just a passing glance to notice that the NBA of the 2020s is dominated by stars from overseas. Not just born and raised, but in many cases trained and employed on professional teams outside the North American basketball system. Basically, all these guys got to the NBA through the draft. Tippy-top picks, deep draft sleepers, late lottery finds, all picked straight from foreign leagues to the NBA. That's not to be taken for granted. The drafting of players from abroad reflects changing sentiments, changing politics, changing technologies, and it's a trend that took root more recently than you might realize. If you want to know how the NBA got this way, let's go spelunking. This is the Draft Cavern. On June 2nd, 1947, the Pittsburgh Ironmen made the first ever pick in what is now called the NBA Draft. Since then, teams have been picking away, gradually excavating this cavern in human history. Each draft year lengthens our tunnel. Each draft pick deepens the shaft for that year. Everyone is here. Everyone. If someone was picked in the NBA draft, they've got a spot in this cavern. Hans Tansler? Howie Janata? Not that one, it's a different one. It's dark and treacherous in here, so I just want you to stay close to me and sign the waiver if you don't mind. You can pause and read the full waiver if you want, but the upshot is this. Each draft pick has the player's name and a flag. The player's name is up to date if they've changed it. The player's flag reflects their nation of birth as it is known today. That does not always tell the whole story, and when relevant, we'll get into that. Shout out to StatHead and to the researchers Robert Bradley and Matthew Maurer for making this data so complete. Next, the draft order in the first few decades gets intermittently wonky because of vague records and territorial draft picks. Does not really matter for our purposes. And finally, we're going to do what the NBA does and count the 1947 BAA draft as the beginning of history. Capiche? Sign here. Great, let's pick. With that first pick in the inaugural 1947 draft, the Pittsburgh Ironmen select Clifton McNeely from Texas Wesleyan University. Come on down, Clifton. Or don't, actually. Clifton McNeely is a useful example for two reasons. One, Clifton was born, raised, and rostered as a college basketball player in the United States. He has this in common with the vast majority of NBA draft picks in history. Two, McNeely did not sign with the Pittsburgh Ironmen. He became a coach and then a school principal. Not a bad call, Clifton, because the Pittsburgh Ironmen folded 2 months later. Yes, the first ever pick in the first ever draft was a soon-to-be-defunct team drafting a soon-to-be-retired basketball player. Never playing NBA minutes is something else Clifton has in common with a lot of draft picks. Many drafted players never made a team. We should probably talk about what the NBA draft is. In a predetermined order, teams choose one at a time from a pool of players who have not previously played in the league. That choice is not a contract, just a claim. It says if this player intends to join the NBA, then this team reserves the exclusive right to offer their first contract, if they want to. If this sounds like a trivial distinction, chalk that up to recency. Since 1989, the NBA draft has been 2 rounds, putting the yearly pick total at roughly the number of teams times 2. As the NBA ticked up to 30 franchises, that made for decades of drafts totaling between 50 and 60 picks. Not a lot of picks. On this near side of history, the draft is short, the world is well connected, and NBA contracts pay better than school principal salaries. Players mostly do not decline the opportunity to sign with an NBA team, and teams do not draft players if they don't think they'll ever be valuable or available to sign. That would be a waste, and the NBA draft is not a time for waste. But it used to be. Before 2 rounds of picks, there were 3. Before that, 7 rounds. Before that, 10. Before that, draft till you drop, literally, unlimited. Each team took turns claiming prospects until they were satisfied, which sometimes ended with just a couple teams going back and forth for quite a while, or even just one remaining team twirling the phone cord and naming obscure college basketball players deep into the night. Drafting was not a zero-sum exercise. You could afford to take flyers on long shots and obscurities. Teams drafted relative nobodies. Sometimes they did the opposite. Teams grabbed the rights to famous athletes from other sports on the off chance they decided to take up basketball, or just for PR. Caitlyn Jenner went 139th overall to the Kansas City Kings in 1977. The world didn't know yet that Jenner was a woman, but other women have been drafted. The Jazz picked Delta State superstar Lucia Harris 2 picks before Jenner in 77. Harris did not sign. Indeed, none of those people ever signed with an NBA team for a variety of reasons. It was nothing out of the ordinary in an era with so many draft picks and so few roster spots. It was only when teams started openly goofing that the NBA moved to apply some constraints. Like, say, when the Hawks claimed the draft rights to a baby. Or when the Sixers tried to pick a 49-year-old pharmacist. The baby pick never went through, and the pharmacist pick got voided, but they give you a sense for how shaggy the draft could be in the 1970s and 80s. Still, amid the waste, long drafts offered opportunity. Every person here has one thing in common. Before getting drafted, they lived in America, or Canada, we're counting that. You see some non-American flags, but all the people beside those flags came over here before they were drafted into the NBA. That's not to say everyone was the same. Tomislav Nikolaevich Meshcheryakov's family had a harrowing, fascinating path to the United States. Then, Tom Meschery played college ball at St. Mary's. In terms of what it took for an NBA team to scout, draft, and sign him, he was ordinary. To the extent that individuals emigrated to the US for basketball, That pipeline was laid by amateur scouts. This guy got recruited by BYU, for instance. So did he. At the pro level, the United States of the 1960s was way more prone to exporting talent. To beef up for battles with powerful Soviet clubs, Western European basketball leagues like Italy's Serie A relaxed rules and opened their doors to American talent. Enterprising agents built entire businesses out of matching undrafted or unsigned American players with those European jobs. This name will come up again, so remember it if you want to go, that guy, later on. While tracking those American players stationed abroad, NBA executives noticed other names, non-American names, popping off the stat sheets. One such executive was Marty Blake, the longtime general manager of the Hawks, spanning multiple decades and relocations. Blake made some famous picks near the tops of drafts, for better and worse, but he was a scout at heart, a talent miner who took pleasure in identifying great players others hadn't. The clearest sign of where he and the league were headed happened deep in the bowels of history's most monumental draft. 1970, a new decade. The NBA had 3 new expansion franchises and had just begun discussing a merger with its rival ABA. That year's draft was magnificent. Look at this absolute dong of an event. After 170 picks, the live draft concluded. Teams were permitted to keep picking via Telegram, and they did, making a grand total of 239 picks. This list is stacked with future Hall of Famers, including a Hawks selection, Pete Maravich, 3rd overall to Atlanta. But Marty Blake's most personal, most revolutionary, yet utterly ineffectual move happened hours later. In the 10th round of this longest ever draft, Marty quietly, matter-of-factly made history. With the 167th pick in the 1970 NBA draft, the Hawks select Manuel Raga. Next round, 182nd pick, presumably via Telegram, Hawks select Dino Meneghin. You can practically hear Commissioner Walter Kennedy's exasperation. Who the hell were these guys? For the first time ever, the Atlanta Hawks had drafted 2 players directly from overseas. Raga was a high-flying wing from Mexico, playing pro ball in Varese, Italy. There, he teamed up with Meneghin, an Italian, to take down the mighty CSKA Moscow and win the 1970 European Championship. Neither Raga nor Meneghin had played a minute of high school or college ball in the US. Blake was not goofing. He had a shoebox of clippings from Spanish-language newspapers to back up his picks. However, Atlanta ownership would not fork over the cash to facilitate buyouts from the club in Italy. Raga and Meneghin remained in Europe, won a lot more together and apart, and went on to both get inducted into the FIBA Hall of Fame. Meneghin was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 2003. Marty Blake went to his grave believing Manuel Raga and Dino Meneghin could have been productive NBA players, and he was probably right. Talk your shit, Marty. Nevertheless, a seal had been broken. The drafts of the 1970s are dotted with the flags of other nations. Mostly guys who attended college in the US, but also some foreigners who had not already been plucked by scouts at the amateur levels. None of them ever signed, and not for lack of trying. NBA talent spotters casting their gaze abroad had help from none other than Marty Blake, who became scouting director for the whole league. For decades, Blake ran the operation for scouting NBA-caliber talent in obscure colleges and far-off lands, building a famous library of reports and videos. Along with Blake's resources, teams began to dedicate in-house staff to scouting other countries. Occasionally, these scouts convinced their teams to draft a guy or even bring him to camp, but through 1984, there were no imports signed to actual contracts. 84 is actually a great example year. The first pick was Akeem Olajuwon from Nigeria and the University of Houston. The 131st pick in that draft was Oscar Schmidt, a Brazilian legend playing in Italy. Schmidt was definitely good enough for the NBA, but the Nets never signed him. Finances and international amateurism rules just made it too much of a headache. The first international scout to, scout to completion was Richard Percadani. That guy. Percadani was an American coaching export to Italy. He knew ball and he knew languages. While abroad, Percadani developed a side hustle connecting European teams in need of talent and American players in need of jobs. When Percadani returned stateside to coach and scout, he kept running Earth's premier international basketball consultancy from his home office in Connecticut. While a Phoenix Suns draft pick was playing in Italy, team owner Jerry Colangelo found out about Percadani's niche expertise and hired him to perhaps reverse the pipeline. One of Perk's first scouting assignments for the Suns was Eurobasket 1985, when national teams from around Europe met for a tournament in West Germany. Percadani watched a lanky 25-year-old as he helped Bulgaria punch above its weight against European powerhouses. The host country had 3 studs in their front court, 3 future first-round picks enrolled at American colleges. This kid stood up to all of them. Percadani reported back to his bosses in Phoenix. The NBA draft was just days later. That 1985 draft had a new lottery system and just 7 rounds. Picks were getting precious, you couldn't waste them like before. But Percadani insisted this Bulgarian guy was as good as Charles Oakley, the power forward Phoenix missed out on with their 10th pick. So, with the 148th overall pick, the Suns called it in. Yorgi Glushkov from Bulgaria. Now, Phoenix claiming the draft rights to a Bulgarian guy wasn't that big a deal by itself. But Yorgi came to Phoenix for training camp and preseason, a tryout, though he didn't necessarily know that. And it went great. Yorgi earned himself a nickname, he put up 18 points in a preseason game, and he had a crowd of Suns fans chanting for him. Phoenix wanted Yorgi. This was still very much the Cold War, but Bulgaria didn't have as stifling a sports federation as Yugoslavia or the Soviet Union. So, Colangelo and Percadani flew to Sofia, met with federation officials, and drank a bellyful of complimentary liquor. They promised a PR tour, they cut a tasty check, and they even agreed to process Glushkov's salary through the federation. The Bulgarians said, "Okay, Yorgi's yours." That was a big deal. The NBA had its first emissary from the Eastern Bloc, the first draft pick directly from overseas to sign with an NBA team. Iron Curtain punctured, a scouting dream realized, a PR coup. And when it all settled, a 25-year-old from Bulgaria trying to fit in with the Phoenix Suns. Yorgi knew basically 0 English. Supposedly, he arrived with just 2 phrases, Phoenix Suns and pretty girl. Coach John McLeod taught himself a few Bulgarian basketball terms while teammates got to work teaching Yorgi how to order yogurt, how to high five, the difference between a chicken and, a chick. To the extent that this stuff is not apocryphal, it's fun, but it must have been an isolating feeling to share so few words with your team. The only fellow compatriots Yorgi had to keep him company were one security guy from the Bulgarian secret police, who wasn't exactly there for a good time, and a man they called Bo. Bo was a Federation veteran sent to translate for the first few weeks. A cop and an old guy. That's it. Meanwhile, the 85-86 Suns stunk. Phoenix was already 0-4 when Glushkov checked into his first ever official NBA game. That night against the Hawks, Yorgi played 11 productive minutes, generating the only cheers amid a depressing 5th straight loss. I've seen the translation of this Yorgi self-review rendered a few different ways, but it always boils down to, well, I won't get executed, so it's all good. This was the vibe early on. The Suns were quite bad, but Yorgi was a fun diversion. And he was settling in. Yorgi drove a Lincoln. Yorgi enjoyed American candy and American soda and American hamburgers. Yorgi played hard off the bench, and he made people laugh because he filled his sneakers with baby powder. He was a roving attraction on an otherwise dismal team. In December, Bo had to go home. Suns employees were wistful. They'd grown fond of the old Bulgarian. Bo's replacement was some guy, a local construction worker who had just showed up one day during preseason. He knew nothing about basketball, but he spoke fluent Bulgarian, so congrats, you're now an assistant trainer. This, unfortunately, was a bad time to switch translators. Coach McLeod had originally pushed a read-and-react offense without many set plays, but he tightened things up after the Suns started 3-15 entering December. This made it even more vital that Yorgi understand what his coach said, which, according to teammate Alvin Adams, was a chore.
Coach McLeod explains for 30 seconds, and then Ruman translates for 30 seconds, and then Yorgi talks back for a minute.
Phoenix just hadn't thought hard enough about the language barrier, and these mid-season changes only widened it. In the new system, Glushkov's performance suffered and his minutes dwindled. There was lifestyle stuff, too. The new translator's age made him a more suitable companion for Yorgi than the elder Bo had been, but that was a double-edged sword. People spoke vaguely about Glushkov's off-court lifestyle, nothing outlandish for a young NBA player, but they got specific when it came to his nutrition. What started as, haha, this guy loves junk food, turned into, holy shit, this guy is only eating junk food. Yorgi was floundering, and it could not have helped that he wasn't really getting paid. Remember, to win Yorgi's release, the Suns had agreed to route paychecks through the Bulgarian Federation, who would then send back Glushkov's cut. But they weren't doing that. Even when Bo returned to Bulgaria promising to prod his bosses, Bulgaria was not paying Yorgi. The Suns took care of Glushkov, but here he was, months into his historic NBA season, not getting paid like an NBA player. Even when the rookie got more minutes in springtime, his reputation seemed set. This article, given the history to follow, is an incredible snapshot. On March 12, 1986, Glushkov started for Phoenix and totally outplayed the Bucks frontcourt as the Suns pulled off an overtime upset in Milwaukee. But the losing coach still wasn't impressed. Yorgi Glushkov, said Don Nelson, was not good. Good work ethic, sure, but straight up not a good player. I guess Nelson didn't think much of his own guys. The article's author suspected that even though Glushkov's Suns contract lasted one more year, this experimental rookie season would be the end of his NBA career. Indeed. Chastened by comments about his diet, Glushkov showed up to 1986 Summer League 20 pounds lighter. He looked so frail that doctors got involved. Summer League went poorly. The Suns soured on their prospect. When Glushkov got an offer from a team in Italy, the Suns encouraged him to take it, and he did. Phoenix patted themselves on the back for making history, expressed some regret over failing to bridge the language barrier, and otherwise chalked up their failed experiment to lifestyle stuff. This part has been denied, but the Suns all seem to believe it. Don Nelson's assessment was the popular one. Yorgi's name became a cautionary tale trotted out every time another foreigner entered the draft conversation. If that guy was the best Europe had to offer, well, then Europeans must not be NBA material. It would not be easy for the next NBA team to import a player from overseas, but a few people had devoted themselves to making it happen. The most devoted of them all would be Don Nelson's own son. Yorgi Glushkov played another decade in Bulgaria, Italy, and Spain. He won an Italian Cup title alongside Oscar Schmidt. He was a FIBA All-Star in 1991. Glushkov retired from playing in 1997, then took over the National Federation. That 86 season faded into the footnotes of Glushkov's career. A sometimes fun, sometimes lonely, sometimes sexy study abroad in Phoenix, Arizona. In the NBA, Yorgi Glushkov was a guinea pig, a novelty, both pioneer and trivia tidbit. In Europe, Yorgi Glushkov is a legend. Thanks for watching. If you liked that, I think you would really like the Secret Base Patreon. There's over an hour more of the Donnie Expedition already published on Patreon, ready for you to watch right now if you subscribe. If you are zonked on the couch and that's too much to ask right now and you just want to watch some more YouTube videos, I've got some recommendations coming up as well. I got you.